I want to welcome everyone to this exciting evening. We have our special guest here, and we are going to be talking about why diversity is so important in clinical research. My name is David Silberman. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Clinical Research Fast Track. And before we introduce our guest, I want to introduce our Director of Outreach and Engagement, Lauren Stockwell. Lauren, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be assisting in this webinar, answering questions, and being here to support you both.
Yeah, so Lauren is going to be with us, and when you have questions, you can type them in the Q&A, you can type them in the chat. Lauren will be answering your questions, and then we are also going to be taking some questions live. Our experience in the past has been there's so many questions, and we try to get to as many as possible. And then when we find those common questions that you all have, we're going to share them with the group. We're going to allow Zoé to speak to those points directly. Lauren, before we jump in, can you introduce yourself, a little bit about you, who you are, and who's the person that's going to be answering all these questions?
I know, who's the stranger on the call, right? So as David said, my name is Lauren Stockwell. I'm our Director of Outreach and Engagement for Clinical Research Fast Track. Been working in this role to help connect our students really to the industry. That is my main passion, is to be a hub with a bunch of spokes off of it. I get to work with every single cohort and every single student to help mentor them and educate them, and furthermore, connect them. That is really my passion. I get to go across the country and bring your guys' names into the rooms that matter. That is my biggest passion in this world.
Well, thank you for being with us, Lauren, and thanks for all that you do. You have helped so many of our students move into roles in clinical research, and that is really what we love to do. At Clinical Research Fast Track, we are an education and training organization. We train principal investigators who are working in the field. We work with major sponsors. We train individuals from research sites as well. And the research site networks and research sites around the country will send their new hires to our organization to train. But what we love to do most is to train new applicants to the industry. These are people who are wanting to work in clinical research, who are ready to work in clinical research, and don't just quite have all of the training, the expertise, and the guidance and support they need to get in. And that is really what we love to do most. And we have one of our instructors with us today, Zoé Felicié. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Zoé. Is that how it is?
Perfect. It was perfect.
Okay. All right. Zoé Felicié not only is an instructor of ours, but she has been in the industry now for over 12 years. I don't want to age you in any way.
No worries.
But you have had this incredible career. You were at Emory University for 9 years working in clinical research, and moved up at Emory, and then now you're at PPD. But can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into clinical research? And also the interesting thing about your story is, I want you to explain, but you're not a doctor or a research PhD. Can you explain who you are, your background, and then what you have done in the clinical research field? How'd you get in?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to come and be able to share a little bit about my story and who I am. But as you said, my name is Zoé Felicié. I am a senior patient diversity specialist at PPD now. And my career in research really started, I guess, oh my gosh, yeah. Let's just say upwards of 12 years in the industry. And it started in undergraduate. My background is in psychology. And as a senior capstone project, I participated in a project that was focused on racial micro and macroaggressions towards African-American college-aged females. And so that was my first introduction at trying to recruit diverse participants, right? And I had the opportunity to be published, and that really like sparked something inside of me. The goal was that I was going to go into graduate school and I was going to go for my PhD. And then, life happened and things changed and my priorities changed. But after graduating, I went into working for Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I did an internship and interned at their foundation. And I went into really learning about project coordination. And I actually spearheaded their first ever Latin radiothon and raised over $500,000 for Children's Healthcare of Atlanta.
Oh,
So
wow.
that was like, okay, I like this. What are we gonna do here? And so once my internship was over, I had to figure out kind of how to pivot, what was gonna be next. And I was applying for positions, trying to figure out what I was gonna do with the psych degree. And I went into working at the Marcus Autism Center as a behavioral data analyst. And that took me to working with children, school-age children on the autism spectrum. I worked in the language and learning clinic and worked with a lot of nonverbal children, just teaching them kind of, how to communicate with their family members and their caregivers. And it was work that I really found just exhilarating, and I loved every piece of it. But as you evolve in your career, you start thinking of, how can I have a larger impact? And I moved on to severe behavior and worked with children that were trying to help modify their behavior. And so I started to learn more about how to run protocols and reinforcements and things of that nature, and did a ton of training. And then from there, I actually moved into doing in-home therapy. And worked for one of my colleagues who branched out and started her own consulting firm. And I became an in-home behavioral therapist and did that for a number of years and loved that. And then something happened where I wanted to turn on my creativity. And I actually went to school for aesthetics. And I had then and still have now a love for dermatology, a love for skincare. But I also have this, creativity, artistry brain. And I became a professional makeup artist and started a bridal business. And, I actually stepped away from research and was focused on this area of my life. And then as my life started evolving, I felt the pull to come back to research. And that's how I ended up back at Emory University.
Awesome. Awesome. Before we go into what you're doing at Emory, I was going to say, you just look so good, but that must be your time working in aesthetics and cosmetology, because I was like, wow, you look fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, but you worked in behavioral therapy, in-home health, a little bit in cosmetology, which is fantastic. And then you went to Emory, and I saw on your resume that you worked as a clinical research coordinator. Is that right?
Yep, I
Can
did.
you explain what that means to our audience? Because some people in our audience, they want to move into a role like that at a place like Emory. Like, what is a clinical research coordinator? What did you do at Emory?
Yeah. So when I first started working at Emory, I actually didn't go in as a coordinator. I went in as a senior research interviewer. Which was, a step below the coordinator, because your responsibilities are a little bit different. But it was really the first time I had ever done any work like that. I worked on a study that was looking at how to measure how much tobacco residue was in people's homes, was actually present if you were a smoker. We were actually sending devices out to people's homes to capture the amount of tobacco residue in their
Oh,
homes,
interesting.
in their
Yeah.
cars. It was really amazing to see the data come back from that. And so I was interviewing participants over the phone. It was the longest interview ever, you all. But I would interview them with a ton of questions. I would ask about our device, and then I would do follow-up calls with them. And so that gave me like that type of exposure that I never had in that type of scenario, because I wasn't meeting the people in person. It was all over the phone. And at that time, you know, we weren't texting, like you were getting the information and you were entering it and you were sitting in a cubicle, and it wasn't glamorous at all. But I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And so that was my introductory into it. And what I want to say to that is the reason I landed there was because I had trained someone at a previous position, right? When I was working at the Marcus Autism, I trained someone who went on to do amazing things. And she was now working at Emory, and she said, hey, I'd love to bring you on. And because I had made that connection and I had, you know, created that relationship, you know, years before, when they had an opportunity, she was like, I want you to come. And so she facilitated an interview, and, you know, I got in. And I know it's typically not that easy. I mean, I talk to people all the time and they say, oh my gosh, how do you get in with no experience? And I technically didn't have experience, but it's connections, it's relationships. Those
Yeah,
are priceless.
absolutely. And we work with our students and we tell them that all the time, that not only when they come and work with us are they getting the training, but they're meeting people like you who,
Absolutely.
well, you're not at Emory anymore, but you're at PPD, you were at Emory, you have the connections, and we have, I don't know if you know this, we now have over, I think, 1,500 of our graduates working across the industry at all these institutions. Think of all of those connections. So that's
Absolutely.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got in with those connections, you're doing these interviews, and then where did you go next? What else at Emory? I know
Mhm.
you did a lot more at Emory.
Yeah, for sure. So that's how I first got into Emory. I ended up leaving, going back to my retail life, for a year or two, and then I came back. And when I came back to Emory, I worked on a project that was focused on organ transplantation and donation in the African American community.
Oh,
So
wow.
again, recruiting diverse participants and talking about a subject that is, you know, super heavy, super sensitive. And it was an opportunity for me to understand what it was like to be out in the trenches, right? I was at libraries, I was at shopping centers, I was in parking lots, I was at the health fair with my little fold up table and my little, you know,
Ah,
grocery store tents, recruiting participants. And so that's when I became a coordinator.
Wow. So you're okay. So you're not a doctor or a PhD, but you have this background in psychology. You've been working in behavioral therapy, and then you go into first tobacco, then organ transplantation, and
Yes.
you're helping with recruiting for what are these trials? They're actually doing organ transplants. Um, can you
No,
talk more about
for
that?
this one, yeah, for that particular project, we were actually trying to help kind of find insights into what were people's thoughts and feelings around organ donation and transplantation. So it was really the way that it looked is that I would go out into the community and I recruit participants just to be a part of my small group, right? Once they accepted to be a part of my small group, we would have a video that we would show and we would have these group discussions about organ transplantation. And I would document the information that was being shared from our participants and then enter the data. Which was later going to be written up for, like, you know, public health white papers and whatnot and be published. But yeah, it was, you know, non-interventional, observational. And I talk to students about this all the time whenever I'm teaching, is I know sometimes we have a very, just our mind is set, right, on what part of the industry we want to work on, what therapeutic area we want to focus on. And I always say, just keep an open mind because you never know, right? You maybe want to go into oncology, but it's okay to start in public health. It's okay to start in psych. You might make a connection that then moves you over and you can pivot and shift as you need.
mhm.
Wow. So you worked on those organ transplant, um, basically surveys, information, and that was to learn more about people's attitudes around them, about whether they were interested in that type of therapy, or what was the goal of that?
So the goal was to find out what people's like initial baseline thoughts were about organ transplant and donation, and then later to really inform and educate them about the choices, right? So I live in Atlanta. I'm Puerto Rican, right? So I'm an Afro Latina. So my background just really positioned me in a way where I was able to speak to a large community, right? And I was able to also validate their fears and just provide a different perspective. Not to, people were very sensitive about that. And I think people still are. It's a sensitive topic. But around that time, there was a lot of talk about organ donation and some of the mistrust that was around, around that topic. And so, yeah, it was difficult. It was tough, right? But it was very much needed. And that kind of leads us to the talk of why representation matters in research and why diversity matters.
Absolutely. And why, no one is comfortable with an organ transplant until they need one, right? And all of a sudden it becomes really relevant. And boy, I have a close friend who had a heart transplant, and I have my friend because of organ transplantation. So it's so powerful working in these areas that become something that we all need. And you are working with diverse communities, talking to them about this. And let's talk about that right now. Can you talk to us about why it's so important to have diverse communities in clinical research? And I want to preface this by, in the news, there's all this politicization around diversity. People on the right and on the left, they're arguing over this political issue. But can we talk a little bit about the science and why this is not about politics? This is about saving lives and really helping people live quality of lives. Why is diversity so important in a clinical trial? Can we just start there, Zoe?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a loaded question, right? Because there's so many factors that go into it. But if we just want to start at the most basic level, diversity in clinical trials is important because we need to understand that the drugs and devices that are coming out into the world are actually safe and efficient for all people who may eventually have to use them, like point blank. That's the most basic reason. Now, we do understand that, there's a lot of thoughts about whether or not, diversity means X, Y, or Z. And what I like to say is diversity means a ton of things. Intersectionality is a real thing. We're not all just fitting in one box. When I speak about diversity, yes, I am talking about race and ethnicity, but I'm also talking about sex. I'm also talking about gender. I'm also talking about urban versus rural. I'm also talking about, physical abilities versus disabilities. There's so many components when it comes to diversity. And I think that that's one of the things that we don't always agree on as an industry, is knowing exactly what are we talking about when it comes to diversity. And so to me, it's really important that we're clear that diversity means a list of things. Now, when we are talking specifically about what the FDA has told us in terms of diversity, yes, the main focus right now is race and ethnicity. But we know that that is going to evolve and grow out to some of those other groups as well.
Yeah, but just to talk about the FDA guidance, in April of 2022, they came out with this guidance that said when we're giving medicine to people, when we're providing treatments to people, we want to ensure that the medicine works on the people that are taking it. And the issue, a very serious issue, was just go back 5-10 years ago, all the trials were happening and we were testing drugs often on 45-year-old men, okay, and white men, Caucasian men from the Northeast, right?
Right.
So in Boston, they do a trial on these white men, but what we found is that doesn't mean those drugs that are approved work on people who have different body types, who have different physiology, biology, because there are differences. So now what we realize is if there's a group of people that have a condition, we need to make sure that the medicine is going to work on them, right?
Exactly.
Regardless of your race, ethnicity, and we can't just assume. And so that is so important.
Yeah.
And there's all these, and what we found, you mentioned this already, that people living in different parts of the country actually often respond to medications differently. People of
Yeah.
different race or ethnicity, or and I know race is like, there's, like you said, you are Puerto Rican and African, right? So there's all kinds of mixes, but we want to make sure medicines work on everybody. And
Absolutely.
so what is happening in the industry right now to bring more diversity and to make sure that that's really happening? Like, what are
Yeah.
we doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that we're doing is we're finally really talking about it. And I think now we're at the point where everybody's like done talking about it, but like, what are we going to do about it? Right.
Right.
We've all gone to all the conferences and heard all the sessions, and we keep kind of beating a dead horse, but now it's like, what are we going to do about it? So one of the things that, like you mentioned, we need to make sure that the devices and the drugs that are coming out are really effective and safe for everybody that's going to use them eventually. And so one of the things that we're seeing, obviously through COVID, we saw people had to pivot and shift. So there's a lot of talk about decentralization, right, of trials. So I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. It's been a big trend, and it's not moving. So we're going to continue to see that. We're seeing a lot more talk about AI and machine learning and how to incorporate that into what we're doing, whether it's selecting sites or having a better insight into what surrounding communities look like on a demographic level. So, looking at race and ethnicity of surrounding neighborhoods, looking at census data and taking that into account when we are creating our recruitment plans and strategies. So I think we're going to continue to see a lot more of tech being integrated into what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Oh my gosh, you're bringing up all of these great terms and questions. Decentralized clinical trials, that's a new term for people. You're talking about different roles in AI. I want to talk a little bit more about those roles. And for all of you who have questions, you may have questions about getting into the industry. What are the roles? How can I do this? We want to hear all of your questions. Our focus is really about what's going on in clinical research. Why is diversity so important? And we know now in this brief conversation it is, but people are working in all these different roles. Can you talk about just well, let's take a step back. Let's talk about what is clinical research. When we're talking about clinical research and all these roles, can you explain to everyone what clinical research is and how it differs from other types of research?
Yeah. So clinical research is when we're or evaluating drugs and behavioral interventions on people, right? We're trying to see how these different compounds that we are coming up with, or these different devices, how they affect people, how safe they are. There's 4 stages, 1 through 4. Typically before stage 1 is the preclinical stage where, we're talking about, lab mice and things of that nature. Phase 1, we're introducing people and so on and so on. The groups get bigger and the stakes get higher, right? And then by the time we get to phase 4, we're talking about post-approval and really monitoring what is happening with a particular compound or device once it goes out to millions of people.
Oh my God, you went over all of clinical research in like 2 minutes from phase
That's
1
what
to
it is.
4. I love it. That's fantastic. Okay, so we're looking at new drugs, devices, therapies, treatments in humans. And that's the key, everyone. These are human trials.
Yes.
And I don't know how many of you in the audience have applied to a job in clinical research and you're like, wow, I have a great educational background. I'm really bright. I'm perfect for this. And you don't even get an interview. Maybe you don't even, they don't even respond. And you're like, what's going on? And probably what's going on is even if you have a great background, you don't have the training in this specialty of clinical research, because clinical research are human trials and there's a lot of rules and regulations that we have to follow.
Mhm.
And the most important thing is safety,
Yes.
patient safety. Like that's number one. Again, that's why diversity is so important, because what we found is a drug that might be safe on one person or type of person may not be for another. And a perfect example is allergies, right? We know
Yeah.
right? Someone can have an allergy, but what if certain groups respond better to one type of medication versus another? We need to do trials. We need to know that. And
Hmm.
clinical research is how we find out what's happening in human trials. So to really work in this industry, that's what we need is human subjects, clinical research experience. Okay, so what the first roles that people get into are clinical research coordinator type roles. Can you, at the
Yeah.
site level, can you explain, Zoe, what that is, what's happening in those roles?
Yeah. So clinical research coordinators are typically really good entry roles. Like I stated previously, I came in as a research interviewer. So I was actually just hired to interview participants and enter data. That was my primary role. As a clinical research coordinator, I was then given more responsibility, right? I was not only just recruiting participants, but I was also helping like develop some of the questionnaires that we were going to administer, right? I was shaping what those visits would be, those research site visits, what they would look like. I was coordinating what participant I was going to interview or speak to. I moved on after working in organ transplantation. I moved on to work on a study that was looking at lupus in African American women. And so that's where I really did a ton of clinical research coordination. And I really stood that whole study up from like the ground up from the very beginning. I was the first person hired on that team. And it meant that I was trying to figure out where we were going to recruit participants for. I was narrowing down what zip codes they were going to come from, what their lives looked like, and the type of support that they might need, whether that meant, transportation, whether that meant childcare, elder care, whether that meant loss of wages for them and how we were going to supplement that. Right. So it's thinking through a lot of different steps that are going to actually impact the participants. And then I was helping to schedule them, get them in. I was sort of like a patient navigator where I would coordinate how to get them to the site, make sure that they had lunch, make sure that they had snacks, make sure that we paid for their parking if they got themselves to the site. Right. And then it was my job to make sure that they received informed consent accurately. Right. So going through the protocol and really making sure that they knew what they were getting into, they knew the expectation, and just really kind of holding participants' hand all the way through. And then once the participants were gone, then the real work of making sure that the data is accurate, making sure that you are sticking to all the regulatory guidelines and that you have all the information that you need, all your T's crossed, your I's dotted, and making sure you're really, really paying attention to detail.
Sure.
Wow, wow. And Lauren, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have like 75,000 questions. So I guess in that coordinator role, you get to, it sounds like you're really enacting the protocol and really you're kind of that go-to person, that patient-facing person that is representing that sponsor organization for this particular protocol. So you get to kind of be the face of it. You're on stage the whole time, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, down to like what you're going to put on your door, right? To let them know that this is the room where we're going to do the interview, like all of that. There's thought that goes into all of that.
So I guess my question for you, I have two first and foremost, but let's start here first. First question for you is what has been your favorite moment with a patient? Like what was that moment that you were like, this is why I do what I do, and this is why I love working with patients?
Yeah.
Most clinical research professionals have one of those, so I had to ask.
Yeah. Ah, man, I have a ton. But you know what? It's funny because I don't really work with patients anymore. But recently, one of my old coworkers was doing a follow-up interview with a participant that I had recruited and enrolled. And she asked about me. And she was like, how's her baby? And my baby's 5 years old.
Oh,
And
that's
it warmed my heart. Like, even though it's been so long, she still remembered me. She still remembered that I am the reason she enrolled. And
Mhm.
she's like, I had a baby shower gift for her, you know? And I'm just like, it's so sweet because, you know, these participants would spend hours with me in a room getting interviewed. And sometimes they were sharing things with me that they had never shared with anyone in their entire lives. Right. And you get to learn so much about people and about their lives and what they're going through. And then when you see them at the follow up, for you to be able to say, well, you know, how'd that thing turn out? Or how's your son? You know, I think those moments, they're priceless.
Yeah.
That for me was the most beautiful moment, to just
Like,
even years after to still have that connection.
Yeah, and you're working as a clinical research coordinator. It's the most amazing role because you're working with the participants in the trial, and sometimes you're working on treatments that could be life-saving or
Mhm.
life-changing for their
Yeah.
family. And boy, that is such a deep connection you can have with the families. But you're also working with the doctors, the principal investigators, you're working with the research team, and you're working with the data. So you get data, people, medical teams. It's really a really integrated, exciting role. Lauren, I know you had 75,000 questions. Maybe you had one more though.
Yes, I want to go back to the whole diversity topic that we're talking about this evening, because I know A, you're super passionate about this, B, you've been working in this basically your entire career. And to be an advocate for diversity, I really want to help the audience here understand why this is an issue too,
Mhm.
right? Like, we've talked about why it's important, but why are we not getting these diverse patients just naturally, right? Why are they not the ones that are first enrolling? So I guess I'm curious your thoughts on like how we can learn to be better from our past.
Oh, and I have
Yeah.
thoughts too, but you go. Zoe, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we have got to address the elephant in the room, right? There is distrust and mistrust when it comes to clinical research
Mhm.
in many communities, especially communities of color.
Mhm.
And I think that as an industry, we have to be very clear and direct about that, that we recognize that. But it is also the reason why so many laws and guidelines and regulations have been put in place to not allow any of the misconduct that has happened in the past to happen again. So I think that you know, that is the reason that, you know, a lot of times we cite the fact that, oh, well, patients of colors or participants of color are just not interested in research. No, that's typically not the reason. It's usually because there is that history, and it's not just history. It's things that we sometimes still see in different ways, right? There's inequalities that we still see in different ways when it comes to healthcare. And so I'm really passionate not only about diversity in clinical trials, but the overall health equity gap, right? And moving the needle in that direction. And I feel like clinical trials is just a part of that. So if we can get that right, then we can keep moving and inching forward towards what we really want to get to, which is health
Okay.
equity.
And Zoe, you were talking about, well, there's a lot of conferences, there's a lot of talk about this. What are people doing? And I want to talk about something that you're doing and that we are doing together, which is we are bringing a whole new generation of clinical research professionals into the industry who are incredibly diverse. They come from all backgrounds, all religions. It's really exciting to know, and from different nationalities, different countries. So we have immigrants who are here. They have a passion for science. They really want to participate. But when someone is enrolling in a clinical research study and they're being enrolled, by someone who looks like them, who's from their
Yes.
community, who might be their cousin, their friend, a family member, a friend of a friend, that's when we can really move the industry forward, because
Yes.
it's not about us versus them, it's only about us. And
Mhm.
that's sort of the vision, and that's where we can really make a difference. I want to ask a question of the audience. You can raise your hand. There's a raise your hand functionality. How many of you would consider you're from a diverse community, maybe based on your gender, religion, race, ethnicity, you name it? How many? Raise your hand if you come from a diverse community. Hit those buttons. I imagine most of you, and then the other interesting thing is there's this whole group of people that I am a part of. My kids are like, hey, when they ask about all the different race and ethnicities, there's not a box for me. And
Mhm.
like they're excluded because often if you're Middle Eastern, North African, there's no box for
There's no
you,
box. Yeah.
right? There's no box, that. So many people might fit in that category too. So it's really how can we do more to bring more people working in the field, not just
Yeah.
being participants in the trial, but actually working in the field. And you're at PPD, isn't that what your role is right now, working there?
Yeah. Yeah, that is, so my chief role is to help establish industry collaborations and external partnerships, but I also lead the Patient Diversity Site Alliance,
Mhm.
which is a network of sites that are organically serving diverse patient communities. And so my whole mission with that site alliance is to just activate sites that are already doing this. They're
Mhm.
organically serving diverse patients just because of where they are, or because of what their staff looks like, or because their PIs are of diverse backgrounds. Studies and tons of research has shown that people typically will seek out a doctor of their same ethnicity or race, just because they feel more comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely, of course.
and so that's part of the reason why it's so important to have diversity in clinical trials. I mean, from your phlebotomist to your admin to your PI, any and everybody has a seat at the table. And that way, when I talk to sites all of the time, it's part of like my everyday bread and butter. But I talk to sites and I tell them, like, we need to start with self-reflection, right? Let's analyze if there are any barriers or obstacles at the site level. And then also, diversity has to come from the inside out. So, how diverse is your organization, right?
Yeah.
Because that way you get different perspectives and you get different voices in the room, and you might have a blind spot that you're just not even aware of.
Mhm. And you may not be able to serve that community that you're blind spotted.
Yeah, you just don't have the tools to. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, Dave.
No, no, Lauren, you got 74 more thousand questions.
Exactly, exactly. So I guess the low hanging fruit and what you're working in day to day when you talk and interact with sites, as they go through, do they feel like they're open and receptive to this feedback and this information? How does that look for you in that type of conversation?
Yeah, I think most sites are very receptive to this conversation. Most sites are in it to serve patients, right? Ultimately. And so they want to also know how to reach their patients, how to make sure that
Mhm,
they are engaged in the communities in which they actually reside.
mhm,
And sometimes it's as simple as, why are we not seeing diversity at our site? But if we drive a couple miles away, there's a ton of diversity, right? So in that case, it's me saying, hey, you bring the research to them. Don't expect them to come to you. Right. So
mm,
it's me advising them on how to do community outreach and how to really engage other community organizations that may be already serving that actual community. And then you can partner with them, ensuring that obviously your values align. You can partner with those organizations. And now you have connected to a trusted voice in that community. And you can figure out how to better serve that community. I always talk about this as well, is we can't go into communities expecting that, we know everything and we're coming there to educate you. No, we go in there humbly, trying to figure out how to better serve you. And
Yes.
then we build a relationship, we build trust. And then from there, we can start introducing what we do, right? As far as recruiting for a clinical trial. But that actual relationship building, trust building needs to happen long before we're trying to recruit for a trial.
And I heard this really, really interesting comparison at a recent conference, actually, all these conferences, right? We're all talking about it. And that's the coolest part to me, is that we have all started to break the ice, because there was all of this, I guess, stigma around this conversation. And I don't feel that that stigma well, I mean, I'm sure there's still a little bit of stigma, but we've been open more to this conversation in the last few years, which has been
Yeah.
really excellent in my opinion, because it's so needed. But we need to talk more about community engagement versus just outreach, right? We wouldn't, the comparison that I heard was so interesting. You wouldn't go on a first date with somebody and then say, will you marry me? Right?
Right.
So why are we going into these communities and speaking with these different people from these different backgrounds that maybe have never even considered healthcare, let alone clinical research, and then saying,
Yeah.
enroll in my trial because I need your data? No,
Right.
go in there and engage with that community and really understand that community and their leaders and their core and what they believe in and what they thrive with,
Yeah.
and then go forward with that. And
Yeah.
then start approaching them about these different conversations and these different opportunities to participate in medicine in the future of medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. That's definitely, you're talking my language. And I always love to tell people, like, there's a difference between community outreach and community engagement.
One is
And
sending a flyer, the other is bringing a flyer to their front door, knocking on it and staying for dinner. So.
exactly, there you go. Not only are you invited to the party, but I'm also asking you to dance.
Yes, ma'am. Another too.
All right, all right. So we're coming to the last 5 minutes of our webinar. I know it goes so fast. We always have people asking questions about all these different roles. Can you briefly describe what a CRA does? People are like, clinical research associate, I see these jobs and I want them. What is a clinical research associate doing? We want to talk a little bit about the roles, and then we're going to close by how people watching can get into the industry by having the proper support, connections, and training. But let's start with that CRA role that people hear so much about. What is that?
Yeah. Clinical research associates, CRAs. I never had the pleasure of being one, but I definitely looked up the role and I was trying to figure out how to get into. So I understand. So CRAs typically work at the actual study level, and they are monitoring studies at research sites that are conducting studies for major sponsors on. It could be a behavioral intervention, it could be an investigational drug or product, it could be a device. There's a number of different type of trials that they could be associated with, but they are really at the study level implementing protocols and helping clinical research coordinators do what they need to do on a day-to-day basis. They're interacting with PIs and all of the site staff. And typically CRAs do a ton of travel, but CRAs, it really has like morphed, right? Like you could be a CRA working for a sponsor, you could be a CRA actually working for a CRO, a clinical research organization, or you could also be working with like just, they have different vendors or organizations that outsource CRAs to do the work as well.
Absolutely. There's when you are a CRA, often you're working across multiple locations. So I know when you were at Emory, you're working on those trials right there at Emory. As a CRA, you'd be going to Emory, and then you could be going to Washington, D.C., and to New York, and to Boston, and all these different places that are working on the same trial in different locations, having input and oversight and looking at the quality of the data across those locations. A great role to have. We do have we have a couple of questions, but we just have a couple minutes left. Before we go, I did want to talk to people about the opportunities in this industry, because we've talked about the clinical research coordinator role. We've talked about the role that you were doing, screening and interviewing, and now we've talked about the CRA role, and there's so many others that people can get into, and you don't have to have a biology degree. You don't have one. You
Nope.
don't have to be a nurse or a doctor. And Zoe, you're not one, and you've been moving up in the field. But
Yeah.
you do have to have this passion for this industry where we're really helping move medicine forward. And
Yeah.
that is really the key. Um, did you have any last thoughts for this group? We've talked about a lot. We've talked about the
Yeah.
roles. We've talked about the importance of diversity in the field. So, hey, what are some last thoughts to leave before we close for the evening?
I would say clinical research is an amazing industry. I get to talk to people all the time and they say, I just fell into clinical research. I kind of did too. But now there's so many other ways to find out about what's going on in the industry. If you truly have a passion for medicine, healthcare, helping people, there's a role for you in clinical research.
Mhm.
Wow. Thank you so much. And Lauren Stockwell, thank you so much for being with us today. Did you have any last words for this group?
I just want to welcome everybody. If you choose this industry, you're entering an industry that is giving people time with their loved ones and giving people more birthdays. And I just want to commend you for taking maybe the first step towards that. And thank you for having me.
All right. And before we go, I want to share this slide. This is our contact info. Please feel to reach out. You can call us. Not now, it's late. Well, no one's going to answer tonight, but you can call us at 602-883-7944. Email us at contact@clinicalresearchfasttrack.com or go to our website. And we are here to help you enter this industry. That is what we do. And one exciting thing that's coming up, Zoe, just a surprise for you, we are actually training a group of principal investigators in Puerto Rico. So
What?
we're gonna be headed. You said Puerto Rican. I'm like,
You
oh
need me to come? I'm down.
maybe, because we're gonna be going to we're gonna be going to Puerto Rico to train principal investigators, which is so exciting. And we've been sent to Mexico, and we also trained a group from Brazil on Zoom. So this is an
Awesome.
international industry, and many of our graduates working in the field now are working on international trials. They're actually traveling abroad and working with companies that are working across the globe. In fact, Zoe, PPD works across the globe too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we're everywhere. Europe, Asia Pacific, everywhere. South America, everywhere.
That's incredible. It's really is a global industry. It's a diverse industry. And Zoe, I want to thank you for being with us today so much. It's so
Thank
great to have you. And thank you for the work you do. Because, like you said, people are talking about bringing more diverse people to our industry, both working in the industry and as research participants. But with you, you're doing something about it.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for the activism to really make our industry better. We appreciate you.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having
much.
All right, and we are over time. So I want to thank you all for joining us. Please contact us tomorrow or next week, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. Once again, we are Clinical Research Fast Track. My name is David Silberman, and I want to thank Lauren Stockwell for being with us today, answering questions, and our special guest, Zoé Felicié. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Bye,
Good
guys.
night. See you soon.